Goes right through to implementation, a way of doing. Do Tank is also a mechanism that we would like to develop for design community peer review of projects that we get involved in. So while some Do Tanks in the future may be general meetings like this one, others will be funded exercises for smaller groups of designers from across different disciplines to review and provide feedback on projects. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Casper de Graaf, and I am going to start with giving you a bit of an update on the manifesto and an idea of what we hope to achieve today. The plan is that we're going to update you on what has happened since the initiative was announced, say a few words about how the Design Manifesto can make a difference, not just in terms of the challenges that we tackle, but how we make this a meaningful process within the design community that brings something new to the party in the city. And then, helped by a panel of designers from different disciplines, we hope to stimulate a discussion with you all to identify what challenges you think we should focus on in the city, and also with your help, start collecting a treasure trove of design stories about Manchester, whether they're significant ones from Manchester's design heritage, like the Manchester Ship Canal, or the very first ever public library, or whether it's the 70s music and clubs, or whether it's present day stories of projects that you might yourselves be involved with. So you have a little while to think about that. What design challenges should we tackle, and what design stories can we highlight? Now, you may have seen that there's some postcards lying around, as well as the Design Manchester Document 18 magazine, which has some information about Manifesto in the back. But the purpose of the postcards and pens, if you don't have a pen, indicate, and somebody will bring one around, is to collect your nominations for Manchester Design Stories, ways in which design has already been central to the character and economy of this city. There could be heritage stories, as I say, or present day ones. It's up to you. If you can please jot your nominations down briefly, maybe just a sentence, on one or more of these postcards, put your name on the back, we'll come and collect them as we go. So, what is the vision for the Manchester Design Manifesto? Perhaps the first thing to say is that the manifesto should not be a document of theoretical ideas, but an action program that engages, that challenges, that acts and sets the pace and shares. So that we're not just talking about procuring designers for a job, but talking to designers more broadly about what works and what doesn't work, and getting some broader feedback. If Manchester as a city is a place that does things differently, then the Manchester Design Manifesto defines our approach to execution. Our aim is to build a design-led culture across the city region, in the public sector, private sector, the third sector, and with the end-user citizens, to create a distinctive and effective delivery culture. So we have lots of strategies. Design, in many ways, is how we can help achieve them. At the same time, we'll build an authentic and ownable narrative, a way of thinking and doing that is identifiable as Manchester, even when it isn't branded Manchester. So the role of the Design Manifesto is to create a momentum, expertise, and guidance to shape Manchester's how. And the Design Manifesto is our way of doing, making best use of the design skills and talents that we have in this part of the world to help make it the livable, inclusive, and prosperous city of opportunity for everybody, regardless of background, that we all want to see. Now, what is the Manchester How? We all know that Manchester How is actually about collaboration. It's about people working in partnership, and the Design Manifesto is actually built on our founding partnership with the city. But also, we know that from there we have to build out partnerships across the region, not only with the civic authorities, but all the wider stakeholders across the city, and that is key to our success. So we're seeking partners both for the overall program and for projects. And partnership and engagement with the design community across the region is central to that approach. So to make all that a reality, what we've been doing in the first quarter of this year is talking to stakeholders and potential partners across the city. Manchester City Council, we've had meetings and discussions with the leader of the City Council, with the Chief Executive, with officials in policy, city centre regeneration, work and skills, culture and other areas. At the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, we've also had meetings with the Chief Executive and with officials in strategy, research, communications, and people who are running programs on homelessness and healthy ageing, for example. We've been having conversations with wider Greater Manchester stakeholders, the Local Enterprise Partnership, the Manchester Growth Company, and Marketing Manchester, the GM Innovation Board, and other people like the Co-op and the BBC, Manchester Metropolitan University, Manchester School of Architecture, Urban Splash, Capital and Centric, Manchester City Football Club, and others. Nationally also, we've been having conversations about building a network of friends that leads to being able to scale this story up and also get funding for projects that we might like to do with Design Council, who are keen to partner with us on various projects, the Arts Council, the Cities and Local Growth Unit, which is a cross-department organisation in the government, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, the British Council, the All-Party Parliamentary Design and Innovation Group, who have worked with this, of course, in the festival as well, Creative England, the UK Design Action Plan, which is a national research project, but is actually led by Professor Martin Evans, who is here at Manchester Metropolitan University. Also the Knowledge Transfer Network, Nesta, our friends at Creative Review. So basically, we're building a network of friends around what we hope to be able to start doing. This has led to a couple of interesting opportunities. Now, one is the cultural partnership, which the City Council has entered into with the Danish cities of Aarhus and Aalborg. I didn't pronounce that quite correctly, but as close as I can get. At the beginning of February, we were invited to present the Design Manifesto Initiative to a delegation of city and cultural leaders from those two cities who were visiting Manchester, and a couple of weeks later, we participated in the return visit to Denmark. As Manchester's Director of Culture, he's described in Danish there somewhere, Dave Moutry said, with representatives of 14 different Manchester organisations participating, the trip was as useful for stimulating collaboration across Manchester as it was for connecting with our Scandi colleagues. From the design perspective, we actually found a shared vision of a holistic approach and an awareness of the changing design environment, with much talk about co-creation. Like giving a 50th anniversary reinterpretation of Sherry Arnstein's 1969 Ladder of Citizen Participation, which now focuses on citizens' cooperation, user-driven innovation, co-production, and co-creation. Doc One, this is the library in Aarhus, has a long-standing partnership with the Central Library in Manchester, and they are very interested in collaborating with us to explore civic service design, which is also a very live conversation over in Denmark. And we think there's a lot of scope in this kind of city-to-city collaboration in these dark days when international relationships are being torn apart by some forces. In Manchester, we often talk about the need to maintain affordable artist spaces in the city centre as the rents go up, with projects like Paradise Works and Rogue Artist Studios. In Aarhus, they have Institute for X, which provides affordable long-term space for disruptive design. And we're looking to see if there are opportunities to replicate something like this here. Perhaps most significantly, we share a focus on livable cities. And we're exploring the potential for organising a 3-day Livable Cities conference in partnership with Manchester and Aarhus Schools of Architecture to take place during this year's Design Manchester Festival in November. The second opportunity arose when the Greater Manchester Combined Authority invited us to review the draft of the local industrial strategy, which is due to be published in a matter of weeks, political climate permitting. The purpose of this was to ensure that the role of design in helping to implement the strategy is recognised and embedded in the text, so it is very much still a foundation building exercise, but it's one that we hope will help us with our central aim of leveraging the power of design in Manchester. What has already been published is the Greater Manchester Independent Prosperity Review, a suite of around 20 reports led by a world-class panel of economists which underpins the strategy. We were asked to design the communications around this project with editorial, design and photography to create an authoritative and accessible set of documents that represents the character of the region. We worked with Bolton-born designer Jane Bowyer and Manchester photographers Shaw and Shaw to produce a visual language that is bold, creative, diverse and focused on people. At Falcon Mill in Bolton, Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport, the Sharp Project in East Manchester, the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, the National Graphene Institute, we're back to the Sharp Project, and many other places across Manchester. So some of the things that we want to do more broadly with Manifesto are to shine an international spotlight on the design stories that already exist across Greater Manchester, to support other projects that are aligned with the purpose of the manifesto, and to create our own exemplars, setting the bar, sharing valuable learning. We want to create a do tank to collaborate, to gather data, to generate insight, challenge and provoke. And that is, in many ways, where we want to bring in a new catalyst of action in the city. To share best practice to help everyone, not just designers, to execute with excellence, and to support the skills agenda by helping to create more design talent in the city, and diverse design talent in the city. We want to develop a design resource, but a design community resource, an open design community resource for the City Council, the Combined Authority, and the extended Manchester family. And key is also that what we would like to do is to facilitate procurement and commissioning of not only established designers, we want to use the best designers for the best projects, but also to open it up for new designers who are quite often quite hard to procure. And let's face it, the economy is being driven by micro businesses who are isolated, and many of them startups. And we feel that we may have a role where we could de-risk that process, where we could help it and open that up for procurement a bit more. And we also want to explore the creation of a meeting and collaboration place for cross-sector and cross-region design talent. So some of the criteria that go into what defines a manifesto project are these. They have to be aligned to our overall strategies. They need to be significant for Manchester while addressing universal concerns. They have to put the audience first and working with partners across the region, and they really need to be projects that make an impact. So, before we move on to having a panel discussion about challenges and design stories, where hopefully we can really get your input, I'd like to know if anybody has any questions that Lou and I can maybe talk about what we're trying to do with the Manifesto program at the moment. I didn't give you notice of that one, did I? There's plenty of opportunities to input, and we'll loosen it up with the panel and with the design stories. I think there are things that I've talked about using do tanks for peer review and opening up procurement for new designers and things like that, which are central to what we're trying to achieve. And it would be great to get people's feedback, both at this meeting, this is an opportunity for that, but if not at this meeting, at any time hereafter, what we're looking to create is an open communication within the design community. So that's welcome. In that case, I'm going to invite Lou to take charge of the panel. And can I just say that one of our panel members, Professor Rachel Cooper, is running slightly late, so she'll join us when she arrives. But meanwhile, we have Lou, Professor Tom Jeffries, and Susie Stubbs to kick it off.
Right, okay. I'll do anything, Charles, that we're ready for those of us hoping we can get some conversation going with our panel discussion this afternoon. We want it to be, informal, conversational, interactive. So do stick your hands up. Can I start by just introducing the panel and asking the panel maybe to do 60 seconds on who we are, and Rachel, when she joins us, who's on the train at the minute and heading over the hills, so hopefully not long. So if you don't know me, then I'm Lou Cordwell. My day job is running a design company in the city. We're 20 years old next year. Yes, I am that old, and I'm now just the person who wanders around the office telling people that only 25% of people were on the internet when we started. So yes, I'm at the established end of it, definitely not the new blood end of the industry. And then in my kind of weekends and evenings, and work with Casper trying to make some of these things happen in the city, and obviously in the context of this, trying to make sure that design becomes front and centre in terms of the city's approach and reputation. Susie.
Okay, I'm Susie Stubbs. I'm Managing Director of Modern Designers. Spotted someone I know. We are a brand agency that's been going for about 15 years. I'm also chair of Castlefield Gallery. In that role, I try and support young creatives as they come out of art school, and I help them get into the world of artistic work. I'm also a trustee at the Turnpike Gallery in Leeds, so I do something similar there, and also manage the Camerata. And in my spare time, I also run Pilkington Club, which is a women's networking group, which I'm hoping Lee's going to speak at some point. That's me.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Jeffries, Professor of Architecture at Manchester School of Architecture. We are 900 undergraduate and master's students, one of the largest schools in the UK. We've a very wide-ranging set of research-based inquiry within the school, heavily connected to external networks, and we're always looking for interesting potential networks to connect into. I believe in the value of professionalism. Kind of RIBA Bible carrying professional. I think the other thing we do is look for ways of innovating and connecting architectural thinking into a wide variety of different types of concepts. So we're actually in the middle of a piece of work at the moment looking at the spatiality of Brexit on the UK-Irish border, for example. That is architectural work, undoubtedly. So that's me.
We'll get to Brexit before long. But I thought it might be the second question, but we'll have to hold Malcolm back. I can see it already. Casper's kind of described the two areas that we're hoping to kind of use the manifesto to drive. One of which we're going to start with, which is the stories element. So it's our belief, and I think people in the room would kind of agree with this, that there's already, in the timeline of Manchester, but also ongoing today, some incredible design work in the city. And so in building design reputation, we're not starting from scratch. So part of our job is going to be to find those projects and to shine a spotlight on them and to tell that story. And they might be 100 years ago, or they might be present day, or they might be just about to launch. So I wanted to kind of start the discussion really by just talking about what makes good design. If we're going to start to look at a project and what should be the criteria, if it's got to have a Manchester flavour, what kind of things should we be looking for? We've talked here about collaboration and some of the things that are quite familiar to us. I think things with a social conscience will feature heavily, trying to do some good in the world. So just maybe start with the panel, and then, to warn you, come to the audience and see what the thoughts are from everyone. Susie, can we start with you?
Big question.
It's a big question.
Well, I think good design does two things. Obviously, good design is beautiful, gorgeous, has aesthetic qualities, but really good design makes a positive difference, I think, to people's lives generally. And I think if design is really, really good, you don't notice it. You just take it for granted. So it could be the way a street's designed. I quite like Oxford Road as an example within the Dutch cycle routes. After a while you stop noticing them, but it improves the quality of life for everybody moving up and down Oxford Road in an absolutely massive way. And for me that's really good design, because it takes into account the needs of all the different user groups, It has a kind of a common good social purpose, as in it makes it more sustainable in the city. There's a safety element to it, but also aesthetically, it makes Oxford Road much more pleasing, which for me really helps. So it needs to combine all those things. But I think for me personally, the way we work, at the heart of all good design is research. So I can design things, or my studio can design things that I think look beautiful, but if they're not appropriate to the target market, if they're not appropriate to the needs of that audience, then there's absolutely no point doing it. So you start with research and need first, and you design appropriately. So if we're looking for stories of good design in Manchester, I don't really want to hark back to the past. I think that's a mistake. We're much more than we were in the Victorian era. I want to see good examples of design that's making change to people's lives, positive difference, and that's really appropriate, and then is also really reputable.
Brilliant.
I think, well, that was good design, crikey. There's an interesting question, I think, around the production of resilience, I think, which you could argue good design enables you to do. And that can either be through disruption. Much as I agree cities should be inclusive spaces and so on, I think one of the problems with that message is sometimes it appears quite boring. And so there needs to be a cultural catch and engagement which design has within it. Now I think the concept of something being visible is important. You actually need to be able to kind of culturally see something, I believe, for it to be considered design. It's interesting, the work we're doing in the UK and Ireland, you notice you're in Ireland because the road signs are graphically less sophisticated because there's an international set of criteria being used. So I think there is a thing around standards and quality, actually, that are sometimes worth enforcing. But standards and quality that should have a degree of openness within them to allow individual interpretation. I always think that good architecture is both definitive but also ambiguous at the same time. And design should enable the user to engage with it in a way that makes sense to them, whilst also being constraining in some way.
Okay, that's a good start. Thoughts from the floor? Who disagrees, agrees. Yeah, brilliant. Let's try without a mic and see if everyone can hear you.
I'm a Manchester graduate, and one of my buddies was sitting in the front row in Nottingham Garret a long time ago. But I'm now at University of the Arts of London, which is by the by really, but I'm at uni. I think good design is ultimately less ordinary. That's what it is. Already I kind of find it interesting that the panel is fracturing into architecture. I want to hear about textiles, I want to hear about product design, I want to hear about new amalgamation of new forms, etc. I'm intrigued to know why all this stuff has not been collated already. Why are we doing it now? Why has it taken a long time to recognise it in the city? That's by design, but...
Well, I think that's a really good point. I think as a city, and I think that's one of my major, not issues, but I think one of the challenges with the manifesto is that as a city we might say we're a design city, but we sure as hell don't appreciate design. And actually we don't talk about it, and as a city we don't really understand what design means either, because it's so bloody broad. You know, yes, architecture, public realm, graphic design, exhibition design, whatever.
I think it's fantastic that this forum is now very open. I think part of the problem is in the past it's been very competitive between studios and agencies in terms of keeping things to themselves. They were attempts 15 years ago maybe through Creative Circle. It didn't run because people are very worried about the income they generate and keeping things secret. So, you know, it would be good to start seeing things across a platform.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally, and I think sometimes these things are always about timing, but what we found is because of the community that's been created through Design Manchester, which has always celebrated that cross-discipline, and actually has been often the only time of the year that some of those disciplines meet, and actually, you know, we've put people on the panel who are transport designers with people who have designed products in the BBC, and guess what? They've all got a common passion for design. You know, everybody wants to put things into the world that do good and make better. And I think And definitely one of the challenges we found as we've begun those conversations is it's quite a new conversation. You know, people are doing things that we would recognise as design, but the word design is quite absent. So there's a bit of shifting. People think of design as like, oh, that's the brochure or the logo. You know, and actually there's quite a job to do to go, actually all of these things are design. And we're lucky that we've got city leaders who absolutely, you almost before you finish the sentence, they've got that. So they're supporting this kind of work. But this is a years and years job, not a months and months job. And I think we recognise that, and it's got to begin with a kind of keeping that job and connecting the design community together and allowing them to kind of shape it. So yeah, it's interesting. And actually there's not many cities, you know, lots of cities talk about a digital strategy or a digital agenda or a green agenda, you know, so, and we've got all of those things and we need to do them and they're all really important. But in terms of distinctiveness, if we can get the design narrative right, that could be a really massive point of distinction for the city in terms of how we do things and how we execute, which is ultimately, the strategies are great, but we'll only be judged on whether we actually deliver it, won't we? So,
I think there's a thing around interdependency, actually, because it is inevitable when you speak to disciplinarily based people, they'll revert to their discipline. It's inevitable because you just do. But the critical thing is to be able to say, all right then, within the context of your expertise area, what are the interdependencies that might make something more than the individual sum of the parts? And I think that's one of the things that a design-based strategy can do. The other thing is about moving design into areas that have some kind of, you can somehow capture, but might not be in a recognisably normal form. You know, policy design doesn't produce things other than policies, but can you actually understand what the nature of a good piece of policy design starts to become, and be able to capture that and say, point to that and say that, you know, the reason we've done this thing and it's produced this result, which is different or better from what would have been previously, you know, what would have normally happened, I think, is part of it.
Any other thoughts from the forum on good design before we get into some real examples and ask people to Casper?
Well, I do just want to say it's not necessarily about good design, but about what is design, because this is one of the big problems that we're always faced with. And certainly that in Design Manchester, we've tried to kind of broaden people's perspective of what covers design. And it's good that you mentioned policy design just there, Tom, because earlier you said culturally, you have to culturally see something for it to be considered design. Now, I was wondering whether you meant it has to be a visual expression or something, because actually one of the things that's in the Greater Manchester Independent Prosperity Review, hidden on page 54, is that Manchester ranks third in the world and second in the UK for service design. You know, and service design is becoming increasingly important, and policy design. It's the question of how do these things fit together, how do we bring design thinking, design methods in terms of resolving problems, providing solutions for problems. So, what is design?
I'm sorry. Hey, Matt Farrow. I think there's also a danger that design becomes elitist. We have to be very careful that actually the best solutions, which is what I think we're striving towards, are created by multidisciplinary skills. And design's had a lot to learn about working with other disciplines to affect the world. I think that's a big challenge.
And one of the things we've talked about in some of the early work that we're trying to push through is you don't necessarily, we're trying to recognise the value of design professionals, you know, not just for our own selfish gain as an industry, but because it is a skill and it is a profession, people spend years crafting it, but also that there are processes and kind of mindsets that citizens themselves can adopt. You know, that, I mean, you know, so Richard will always talk about the people making beautiful window boxes in Cube, that's great, because, you know, that's citizens going designing their own place better. And so I think that there's also a job, to make people not feel like you have, you know, it's some elitist goal and that they can't possibly influence, that they can learn from those practices and they can be part of that process, either through co-design or through actually just beginning to adopt some of those skills themselves. So yeah, completely agree. And that would be very Manchester, wouldn't it, for us not to be elitist about that, I think.
Hi. For me, it's so often about narratives, and I'm sitting here thinking, why? So why are we here? So, and I'm not a show of hands. Who isn't involved in design as a design professional here? So it's great to see people along, because I often sit in these events and speak to designers about how great design is. So my question is why? Why are we doing this? Who's it for? How are we going to know we've done it really well? And also then, how long is this going to take? So I know that only little words, but big questions. Sorry.
So I think the second of those, how long will it take? Probably forever. You know, it'll never be done, and this is definitely a years and years task. And I think the why is possibly slightly different depending on who you ask the question to. I think the city as the main kind of driver of this. The why is because they're passionate that we're in a moment where the execution has to be brilliant. You know, so for those people who spent a long time campaigning for devolution and for the powers to be able to design it better and get it right, you know, we're at a moment where probably we've got to get it right for ourselves because national government doesn't really care about anything north of Birmingham. You know, so I think there's just a sense that actually there's some really big ambitions for the city and the city region that are stated in the strategy documents that we talked about before. But all of that is meaningless unless we get the delivery and the execution right. And I think there's a real recognition that kind of huge spectrum of design skills, whether it's transport, architecture, product, whatever, all have a massive role to play. And so I think, you know, and the byproduct of which could be some really distinctive narrative. So you hear a lot in those circles people say, you know, if we cover the logo up, does this feel like Manchester? You know, and that's quite a challenge. You know, and I think our belief is that that's in the how things get done. You know, that it will be the narrative of how something was made or delivered that will be the distinctiveness, not necessarily like, oh, we need to get to a font that if you cover the logo up, we know it's Manchester. So I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I would just only add that with the manifesto, it is lots of different conversations have to be had with lots of different stakeholders and indeed with end users. And the reason that in this room it's mostly designers is because this is actually, after 5 months spending, you know, talking to all the other stakeholders, this is the first time that we've kind of brought the design community together to have a cross-disciplinary design discussion about what do we as the design community think. Because what we're trying to do is build a partnership between the design community, broadly interpreted, and all these other city stakeholders. I mean, of course, it's great that we also have other people that are non-designers to kind of level the breadth, but it is specifically intended to be a design community conversation.
I guess, sorry, just to add to that, I guess for me, I'm not sure what outcome, and I guess that's what we're here to discuss, but it's what the outcomes of the design manifesto. So is it that for us as designers and design agencies, we get better work, we get more projects, we don't have to compete so much with each other, as you rightly pointed out? Is it that we want to design a better city, which is wonderful, but how does that look like? Or is it something else? Is it about talent and kind of retaining talent in Manchester? I don't know, and so I think we need to be really clear about what we want to achieve so that we get the right narrative, the right stories. You know, there's lots of people sitting here actually who are within design, designers who are working in design industries. Why are you here? What do you want to see from design in Manchester? Because I'm not 100% clear.
Yeah, I mean, the overall deliverable is that Manchester, over the next few years, becomes more internationally recognised as a design city, you know, and that there's stuff to build on. We know that, but that we are recognised as a world-leading design city. The reality is that's going to take all of the above that you've just described to do that, you know, because we've got to do some telling stories, we've got to make some new things happen that wouldn't have ordinarily happened. We probably need some more talent chucked in the mix, and we are trying to kind of smooth the way between how things get commissioned, not just by public service, but, you know, by people in the city and the people who get to commission that, you know. So I think what we've recognised, what we definitely don't want is to write a document. So I think one of the things we said to begin with is a manifesto is not to produce a big document here and say, there is the manifesto, and now we shall all live the manifesto, you know, because I don't think it's going to make any difference. So hence the focus on doing and not thinking about things too much, you know, but just rolling our sleeves up and getting on with it, you know. So I think, but the reality is almost on a weekly basis, what it becomes, there are other projects that kind of land at our door. You know, we had a conversation last week about homelessness, where, having said we would stay away from homelessness because it's a very big, tricky subject with lots of people already in there trying to do work. We've had people turn up and say, can can we use design to better design the whole end-to-end process? Because actually we've got lots of component parts, but we're starting to recognise that there is a job to do to begin to design the whole journey better, and people are still talking in their own component parts, and that actually there's design skill to that. So, Max,
sorry, I've got to disagree with you about thinking.
I thought you had.
I think you need to think about things all the time.
Thinking well,
but because the design is a critically based process, and a critically based practice, isn't it? And actually, just doing stuff doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, I think it's about moving things forward. The notion that every good manifesto has some statements in it that set out your position, don't know, one thing or the other, and in a way that the manifesto should have some statements that are kind of fundamental, but allow high degrees of interpretation.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm being slightly flippant and saying it's more doing than thinking. I think the risk that we all recognise is that we could lock ourselves in a room for 2 years and think about what the statements should be, and it probably wouldn't make much difference. So I think, but yeah, interested to hear thoughts from the floor about how much people do believe those statements needed. Matt?
Yeah, I think growing up in the north of England, we tend to be a little less ambitious on a global scale.
Yeah.
I think I agree with the question about why. There's some pretty big themes out there in the world at the moment. As a design leader and a father of 4 children, I worry about the world. I don't worry about Manchester, whatever. And so I think, to be honest, I think, and you've got a competitive landscape here as well. So the current state is, as a design community, do we really want to be competing against each other on something that might not make a difference? I think I'd much prefer to go for a much bigger theme, like what is our position on climate change?
Yeah.
I know it sounds like an obvious thing, but what are we doing as a group of designers to solve that as a city? Feels to something we could get recognition for on a global scale.
Yeah.
And it may not be climate change, it may be something else, but I think it needs to be that level of ambition that everybody gets behind.
That's it. I suppose we're going to come on to those. That's a big part of today, is to understand if we're going to tackle some things. If we want to, nail the manifesto to a few points. What's the view in the room on what they should be? It'd be good to come to that. So there's another hands.
Hi. I understand the need and really admire the ambition. My question, sorry, is a bit focused on architecture because that's my profession, but how does this manifesto actually bring about change in the nuts and bolts, which is the planning process? And actually, if it's not a stated thing that's adopted as a material planning policy, how are we actually going to lift the bar of design? I worked at Westminster Council for quite a long time and had a real manifesto for lifting the design quality in all new developments, but actually when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of the planning decision, the planning committee, the appeal process, actually that slowly waters away. So actually, how do we make this a standard that everyone adheres to? Even in Manchester at the moment, there's peer review through Design Northwest, but even, I sit on those panels and, constantly we're wishing that the design standard was higher. And, how do you actually make it something that everyone commits to?
Which I think is, so I don't have the answer to that. But I think one of the interesting things about this being a public-private partnership, in effect, is that if you're working in partnership with cities, then it's easier to potentially change policies. And there will be points in this that to get things done, there will be a kind of policy ask, perhaps, to say it's not good enough, and the way to make this good enough is to change the following things. So that's really interesting.
It's going to be the first to use the safe word, but I'm London. And say to you that amongst my students in the past and colleagues in design, there's always been this kind of grumble that the best work has gone outside Manchester. So have we got better control of that, and is that happening? People love to go down to the Syrian Clive and have a nice lunch and do a bit of shopping in Covent Garden and come back. But are we away from that? Because that's something to kind of consider to the extent that we've got to stop losing our best students outside the city.
Which is one of the advantages of building reputation, isn't it? You know, is what we talk about in international. Actually, of course, we want great people to be here and stay here and work here. And actually, you know, Manchester does pretty well in the sentiment stakes. You know, actually a lot of students would like to stay here if they could, you know, do the work that they want to do. You know, so yeah, that's perhaps one of the KPIs. Yeah, we're going to get into measuring things.
There was an interesting article in The Guardian, I think, about a year ago about changing attitudes towards London from young creatives. So the narrative used to be, I graduate, I have to go to London, I'm going right now. And then it shifted to, I have to go to London, I'm going to go, I'm going to come back sooner. And then it shifted to, I don't want to go, but I have to go for a short amount of time. So young people are becoming less inclined to go to London, largely because it's so expensive and unsustainable place to live, but also because there is more work up here in the regional cities, but there isn't enough work up here.
Just on the postcard front, I'd like to see every student getting one saying, what is hot Manchester design to you? Because a keen student knows design like football, they know what designer eats and drinks and does. So let's capture them straight away, and they'll tell you what their perception of it is. If you get a very poor response, then the message isn't going to get. I suspect you might get a good response from quite a range of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good idea.
Yeah.
But can I just jump in on a couple of points?
Before you do, can I just say Rachel's just joined us. In 20 seconds, Rachel, would you mind just introducing yourself?
I'm Rachel Cooper. I'm Professor of Design at Lancaster University. I live in South Manchester, and really my heart is in Manchester, I think. And I teach design management, design strategy in urban worlds, in manufacturing worlds, and all over the place.
Great. Of course, you know the project of the Design Manifesto, so you're able to segue in quite well. I just want to pick up on a couple of points. This thing about why, what's it about? You know, I think the manifesto, the Design Manchester and the festival is very much about promoting design and creating a showcase for that. So, doing that function. The manifesto's function is not that. What's the manifesto driven by? The manifesto is driven by the strategies that the city has, the city and the region has. Strategies for the next 10 years, a livable, inclusive city, diverse, all these different things that we want to achieve, prosperous, successful, and that agenda is changing, but there is a very clear strategy, and it's underpinned by some really good thinking and research. And what we're really saying is that it is a good idea to have design in that process of how we're going to achieve those things. And we're looking for a more efficient way of doing that, and a more, actually crucially, a more open way of doing that. So that we open the way in which the city and the region is actually engaging with the design community to achieve those objectives. I think that, in a nutshell, is probably the purpose of the manifesto and the thing that drives it. I think in terms of the big challenge that we might go going for, I actually really agree with Matt. One of the big strategies is zero carbon. In Manchester, they've got one of the most ambitious targets as far as that is concerned. So zero carbon is locally relevant. Locally significant, but internationally relevant. So it suits what we want. Digital wellness, homelessness, all these different things, and they are big subjects. But I think actually we're also open to things that are very specific to a local community. So it's a potential range that the manifesto can get involved in. As far as I wanted to only just respond on the architecture question about whether it's about policy and planning and so on. I think, yes, there are opportunities here in Manchester to affect those agendas, but it's also dealing with the challenges that the profession itself is facing and how things are changing around it. We had an architecture innovation symposium as part of the festival the year before last, and it was all about consultation and how that changed the consultation, segueing, shall we say, into co-design, and the role of the architect in that, because co-design isn't going to produce a building that will stand up for 100 years. You need the architect. But co-design is a really important role to play. So where is that actually going? And in Manchester, we're kind of small enough and big enough to really explore these types of things in a way that other cities could then learn from. That's part of the ambition, I think.
Part of the purpose of design, surely, is to deliver complex things that appear bleeding obvious. So zero, you can say, we're going to be zero carbon. How do you do that in a way that actually embodies everything we also want to do? right, that supports diverse and very, very complex lifestyles, that is contemporary, yet you can kind of somehow see it. I mean, one of the real problems with sustainability is it's invisible. And actually being able to make things, this goes back to the point I made earlier, you know, to be able to capture that somehow, and you can point at it and you know, be objective about it, is important. And you know, when you're dealing with the kind of conflicting demands of heritage landscapes like the centre of Manchester and sustainability, working your way through that does require a lot of skill and a lot of different sets of actors to actually get a good outcome. You know, one of my favourite documents is the 1948 Manchester Plan. Worth checking out if you've never seen it. 5 buildings were kept in the city centre. 5. And this wasn't one of them. And in a way, that makes life very simple, you see, when you can say, right, we're just going to start again. But we're not in that position, are we? You know, and I think it's actually working our way through complexity to do things that are sort of deemed essential and will be really, really good when they're delivered. But actually using the design manifesto as a mechanism to achieve that.
So I was going to attempt, but we'll give it a go, to try and have a bit of a conversation about if we were going to all pick an example of, you know, design at work, past or present in the city, that we would put we would want to tell the world about, what those examples would be. Maybe Rachel, would you mind if I brought you in at that point to talk about what you would put on your postcard as a great example, or something that kind of captures Manchester's design spirit?
I think I'll talk about I wouldn't pick out one design. I think I would say the change in behaviour and attitude of the city council somewhere around after the bomb, and that's about people's attitudes to the future of Manchester, and not continually looking at Manchester of the past, but saying we're going to look at what Manchester can be in the future, rather than just talking about how great it was in the past. And the reason I've come to that is, and I think I'll pick up on this whole idea of a vision for the city. All the research I've done suggests there's, in order to understand the future and be innovative in a city, first of all, cities have to understand what their values are. So what are the values of Manchester? And that's in the plan. But you can say it's got to be livable, it's got to be sustainable, it's got to be walkable, it's got to be so many ables, right? But what are the primary goals? Right? And some places say zero carbon. Okay, do you know what your carbon output is now, and how could you get to that? And lots of places don't. But let's say you have to have the values, and they're set out on the plan. But then you have to have a way of changing governance so it is much more innovative, adaptable, and urban planning particularly is particularly bad at looking at places in a 360-degree way. What I mean by this is why design is good, and designers are very good, or they should learn to be good at looking at things in a 360-degree perspective, i.e. understanding the research about carbon, understanding the research about health, and drawing that into design decision-making in the governance of the city. So that's where the design manifesto can help. It can help into that, into helping people understand how to look at a problem from a 360-degree approach, and also visualising it. The two things. And then designing a play. Urban cities have to be, you have to design for 1 million individuals, because you cannot design and just say it's sustainable. Just say it's sustainable for everybody. It's how is it sustainable for who and in what way. So I wouldn't pick out any one place in Manchester, but I think the whole of the design of Manchester has been influenced by a vision. You might call it a rhetoric, but a vision that's been communicated.
So who would pick out something from Manchester's past or present? What are the design stories that we want to tell the world? Anybody going to chuck one into the hat.
Very quick, we've got two that people refer to all the time to theatre, which is unfortunate, because I know the origin of one but not the other. Trams and cranes.
Yeah.
And football stadium.
And that negates everything. So that's what it is. And I see hordes of people taking pictures. I'm part of a little group where we travel by tram back to Didsbury and we count them. And it's sad, right? It's 48 today.
But
We know the trams from Italy, etc. But it's pretty difficult. We're signified by those two things at the moment, I think.
But cranes are often a sign of prosperity.
Oh, are they?
Zoe, I can see you waving at the back.
I would plead if you wouldn't say that then. Although I get told that a lot, so people say that same thing, like cranes are a sign of. I can't see any space around Manchester anymore. One of the things I would put on a postcard, and it's not a tangible thing, so I don't know how I'd articulate on a postcard, but it's people. And that is something that people have always made things happen in this city. You don't refer to many other cities and say, oh, the people are great. No offence to anyone in London, but I don't come back from London and go, the people are great in London. I speak to
I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you.
I mean, we're in the wrong place and show that, people hopefully agree. But the main thing is, I always refer back to this a lot, and it's not just about talent, it's allowing space for that to happen. Things don't just happen by writing it down, like you say. There are no spaces anymore to allow that magic to actually come to full fruition. Unless you have money and you're able to spend money on a space in Manchester. For example, at the moment, there's more exciting things going on in Stockport. Because in Stockport there are affordable working spaces where you can go. That is really sad because the City Council, although they've been trying to help maintain affordable working spaces in Manchester, they have inevitably pushed them further and further out into the greater Manchester area, which is brilliant because that means Stockport, that's fantastic and you can see those projects happening. But I think we need to make sure that there are some parts of sustainability in terms of talent, not just materials, but when I look around it's really sad when I just see another tower block and another tower block that are actually really poorly designed and full of cladding, and now we know that that's really significantly bad, and that was a really bad design decision that's not safe. So there are people living in Manchester that are living in buildings that are unsafe. There are no spaces for people to go. And just, I mean, we're quite lucky, I think, with Design Manchester and what that's been created. That has been people that have created Design Manchester. It's you guys. That's why I want to be here. Because I want to be around the people that are in the street. Because I want to
Okay, that's going to get the conversation going.
There are a few things that could be unpacked from that, but I think there's a very interesting concept of a creative ecosystem, which is it supports creativity at all the stages you want. So one of the great things about this city, I always tell visitors, is there's close to 100,000 students. It's always 21 years old. That's fantastic. But when they leave, how can they stay? Last year I think more graduates stayed than left, which was the first time ever. The challenge, I guess, for the city and actually the wider kind of Greater Manchester conurbation is how to create the context and the circumstances within which people have the ability to stay if they want to. And I think that's goes back to this kind of space discussion.
I find it slightly old in Manchester. Manchester is a city that has traded on its creative profile for 30, 40 years. So we say we're a creative city, we say we're a design city, And yet what we are failing to do at the moment is supporting our young people who are young creatives. Where is the cheap studio space? We've got Rogue Studios, which the council supported, which is fantastic, but where is it in the city centre? The Northern Quarter, which is where all the design agencies used to be, where my studio still is now full of bars and incredibly expensive office space. We've got Castlefield Gallery right out on the edge of the city doing its best to support young creatives. But we're not giving young people, like you say, that space, and it's not just physical space, it's mental space. It's a space not to have to think, oh crap, how am I going to pay my rent and my studio costs this month? I'm not going to, I can't eat properly. I'm going to give it, chuck it all in and go and get a proper job in inverted commas. If we want to support creatives, we have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to pay our interns, like I do in my studio. We have to give them cheap, good studio space, good light in the city centre. And we have to showcase their work as well. And I think for me, it's something I feel quite passionate about. If we are serious about becoming an international design city, that that's what we should put our money into.
I would say there's two conversations going on here. One is what the city can do for you,
Yes.
and the other one is what you can do for the city. I think the design manifesto is about what we can do for the city, but you could actually say we can do this, but in order to do this, we could do with having some of this. You know, there is a discussion there, but I think there are two conversations. One is about what, you know, people want and need from a planning policy, from a economic policy, and the other one is what can the community, the design community, stand up and do for the city.
Okay, good point. I'm just going to come to somebody in the audience because I'm going to try for a little bit to talk a bit about what are the stories and what we would put on a postcard or have put on a postcard if you brought them. So yeah.
It was just going back to what we're doing on the postcard and just listening to some of the statements that there wasn't a lot of space left in Manchester, and actually one place that really pops to my mind in terms of good design and a space that reappropriated or was just an underground passageway is Hatch. That's based on Oxford Road, and that's probably a place that would really spring to my mind in terms of its co-working. It reappropriated what was an abandoned under the Mancunian Way. Nothing was there, and it gave small businesses, creatives, restaurateurs, really cheap temporary lease spaces that they could appropriate on sort of short-term leases, and also created somewhere of a dynamic which gave that little pocket of the city an identity, and also brought people in from all around sort of the north of England coming to Hatch and to experience that. So that would have been somewhere that I might want to put onto a postcard, and also links back to some of the discussions about space and co-working and leases and space in Manchester.
Brilliant. Other examples?
I'm looking at the air conditioning, thinking that this was due, which was a space for exactly this discussion.
Yeah.
You know, on an ongoing basis in terms of the exhibitions and so on. So, I mean, I don't know why that's not here anymore, and maybe down to rent prices and so on, but, you know, it's just an observation that that's the space that we've lost for this kind of conversation. And was that intentional? Do you guys know that?
Yeah. I did, but I'd forgotten, so maybe it was subconscious, but yeah. Okay, so did anybody else fill in a postcard? Simon?
I think the B network, the Chris Boardman's B network,
Yeah.
I think if anything says something about Manchester's ambitions as a city right now, which are kind of locally significant, internationally relevant all the way around, then I think that's it really, because it speaks for health, innovation, technology, everything.
Yeah, and it's super ambitious as well, isn't it, as a project? Other examples? Panel, Sue?
I've got one, it's about to launch, so it's not quite launched, but it's called Our Pass, and it's a free bus pass for anyone who's aged 16 to 18 across Greater Manchester, which doesn't sound particularly exciting, it's a bus pass. But the idea is you get 16, that's a very decisive point in your life. You're deciding whether to do further study, whether to go into work, whether to go into training. But quite often for our 16 to 18-year-olds, they can't afford to travel some of those work training opportunities. But also some research came out that said that actually quite often there's a 10-mile, or there's a name for it, I can't remember what it is, a 10-mile radius, that young people quite often don't go further than 10 miles from their home. So they're not actually getting out across Greater Manchester and kind of tapping into all the great, free, interesting stuff that exists for them on their doorstep. So the idea of this bus pass is that it gets young people onto the buses, opens up opportunities for them. The design element of it was designed by young people aged 14 to 18 across Greater Manchester, and it's been administered by Transport for Greater Manchester. But it's such a great idea, and that for me is a great example of creative problem solving. Looking at our 16 to 18 year olds, working out what's stopping them, what are the barriers, and then working with young people to come up with a solution.
I think I'd pitch for large built things in the city.
Any particular?
Well, I particularly like railway viaducts. They're excellent. The Manchester Ship Canal, that is a good piece of infrastructure. The trams, bit tame, terrible colour. Up to be controversial, but it's rubbish. It's rubbish colour. You can't see it. But I think big pieces of built infrastructure, and it's interesting the conversation, the observation about Hatch just now. The interesting thing about the Mancunian Way, one of the longest pieces of cast in situ concrete in Europe. But also, there's the ability. I think the interesting thing there is the desire and ability to reappropriate latent space that sits within the city, and that requires some vision on the part of people who are prepared to put the money up to do it, but also some vision on the part of policy making and governance to enable that to happen. And enabling releasing latent value, I think, will be something that would be very useful for the city in general.
I actually think they could do with releasing some land for green space. I think Manchester has not got enough green space compared to other places, and if green space is a lung and also a space of well-being, first of all they should do something with Piccadilly Gardens, which is completely awful, badly designed, but there are other places that they are used for developers rather than developing the health and well-being of the city.
Yes.
I like the idea of putting what we like in the city and we promote, but maybe on the other side of the card we should put what doesn't work in the city.
Yeah, so that would be good actually.
And what we could solve by the design or appropriate design or brainstorming or this would be the direction the direction manifesto that we need to target this issue.
So that's where we're going to take the conversation now for the last bit of our discussion. So if we were going to tackle some challenges in the city and use design, where can design make a difference? That's a huge part of what we want to get to. Malcolm, would you like to start that conversation?
Well, we've talked about trams, which I actually quite like. I think the trams make it Manchester a much more European feeling city. I grew up a time before the trams, and I think it's a much better city since the trams. However, we do not have an integrated transport system. That's actually what we need to be able to explore the city. I spend a lot of time walking from All Saints to the Northern Quarter and back to All Saints, but there's no way, or I don't understand the way to get there easily. You've got a city like London, much bigger, it's much more easy to travel around and use all of the integrated transport. Absolutely, but you can use all the systems in an integrated way. It's very easy to understand. Manchester's rubbish.
But it's more healthy walking.
Oh yeah, I'm very healthy. But you need integrated transport.
Integrated transport includes walking.
I'd argue walking in the city centre is not that healthy for you, given that it's one of the most polluted, some of the most polluted roads in the country.
Somebody mentioned air quality there.
Yeah.
It's interesting for LAM, what they've done is anybody that sees an empty roof space or anything empty, they cover it with green. It's very, very easy, it's very, very simple.
Totally.
You have vertical gardens, it just needs the people that have the purse strings that can make policy to do very, very simple things, and all these things add up and they make a massive difference. So it's very simple.
Yeah.
Like doing press on.
We've got quite a back row there, yeah. Thanks.
Just to build on a few points that have been mentioned already about Manchester lacking a world-class green space in the city centre, by which I'm not talking about Sackville Gardens, I'm talking about something. A few people mentioned comparisons of London, so I used to work in London for 12 years. And for those folks, it does have a fantastic resource of beautiful parks in the city centre, which can be a space to meet other lunch or to sit down and talk to people and bounce off each other, a space to relax at lunchtime or have a walking meeting. We just don't have that in the city centre of Manchester. Now, it's not an easy thing to get a solution to because of what we've just said about competition for development sites, of all these street-level car parks which we still see quite having. But there is a kind of maybe a question for the design community about how to look at that in a new way and think about the broader economic and social value that would have to the city, even though it may cost a bit in financial terms or have all sorts of practical difficulties about where to start.
That's not impossible. If you go to Dallas, they turn the equivalent of the flyover near the
Highline.
They turn it into garden space with restaurants and so on. So you can actually, it's not impossible. It just needs innovative urban planners.
We've got a few there.
I think we've talked about a few things. The lack of space for creativity in the centre is a big one, and I know that a lot of the council policy in recent years has been to move creatives into places that need to be regenerated, so Rogue Studios going into Gorton, for example. And there's also a history of creativity happening in temporary spaces, people filling empty shops, and that can often be to save business rates for people. And all that's well and good, but we need permanent spaces. So a potential solution for that would be, when they built Tesco's 10 years ago in my neck of the woods, Tesco had to provide a doctor's surgery and some local housing, affordable housing, in return for the site. All those cranes that we talk about, can we not enforce creative space on a permanent basis in the bottom of all these massive buildings that are going up? That's part of the city strategy.
That's a great point.
Kind of touches on a story that I didn't bother putting forward, sorry, but it's about the story about the Smithfield buildings in the northern quarter that the Splash developed. I wasn't involved, so I don't know all of the detail, but one of the things that always stuck with me when I heard about how that was developed and the process that went through, I think it was Stephen Bell, the architect, that the ground floor was essentially worthless because you couldn't put residential into it. There wasn't much of a retail offering in the northern quarter at the time. And the story, I don't know if it's true or not, is that it was then put into the sort of appraisal of that development at zero value, and everything was based on the apartments above. And that allowed them the freedom to sort of pick and choose people to come in on a very low cost or even free basis to start with. And that kind of essentially built what we see as a lot of the retail and kind of cultural offering in London. There were bits at the time, but certainly not as intense as it is now. And over the sort of 20 years, I guess that's now become a very valuable retail space, but it wasn't then. I suppose that coming back to there isn't much space, so we can always build it, we can always be more visionary and more imaginative about how we use things. And it isn't just a sort of, I suppose, there are lots of more intense cities in Manchester that still have a creative culture, and so we shouldn't get too much on the negative that we're losing all of this. That can still exist in much denser cities than Manchester. So how do we get there?
Absolutely.
So I would like to ask is how can that creative culture not only help itself, but help places like Gorton, which has the lowest and the highest unhealthy population and one of the lowest socioeconomic populations in Manchester. How can we tackle issues like long-term unemployment around the Manchester City Stadium? The local authority has some really big issues, long-term unemployment among certain communities, very, very poor standards in health. So how can we as designers do something to help that, as well as people, maintain the creative community?
So I come from a tech design perspective, and it's interesting, like this obviously very broad church into the design. So we don't have a shortage of job problem. We have a shortage of people problem. So we can't recruit people, and that is across technology recruitment in Manchester. So I think that point there is like what we do for the broader region. It's about education and skills and people understanding what design is. I think kids often, when they come into our business, tend to think it's about drawing, and they draw. That's design, it's graphic design, and they don't understand what possibilities are. So I think that as a design community, we could serve both design in Manchester and broader community through skills and training and outreach things.
So that builds into the design community influencing the social and education policy of the City Council. And if you said to the City Council, invest more in the local techs, in the, in schools, in getting this pipeline of talent from particular areas into, where, you've got low educational attainment, etc., you're actually helping the design community and helping that community. And I think that's where what we can do for them and what they can do for us is the mutual beneficial aspect of us being creative about what we can do.
There's a very good example of that already there, obviously, in East Manchester at the Sharp Project, where they've gone into a community where the idea of digital democracy didn't exist, so people from East Manchester are not being able to take advantage of the incredible paucity of skills in the tech sector. I think it's something like 70% of tech-based companies, tech companies in the Northwest can't recruit. It's absolutely incredible. So Sharp Project went into East Manchester to kind of readdress that and to get young people in East Manchester trained up and working with digital and tech companies. And it's been a massive success. So we've got a blueprint that we could possibly roll out in other areas of the city.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think some of the bigger challenges around just curriculum around design. I don't know whether Manchester can influence. I know that my two boys and teenagers, they do design technology, and they come back and show me what they're doing, and they're horrified at the lack of creativity in those lessons. It's all very aimed at material technology, and talk about how to turn a child off design.
Yes.
And I think just generally, what can Manchester do to maybe up the ante on how we educate the children in the area in the first place to get them engaged? Because I personally can't understand how any child wouldn't want to be in a creative environment with a team solving problems, and yet the schools are just failing miserably to build that. I think that's going to continue.
I think you have to keep your eye on when the universities, the government are going to allow entry with E-grades. That's going to be the next big issue.
Yeah, and part of that is in devolution of power. So at the minute it's not got some of the control that it would like over that. But actually the reality is it's incredibly complex. On a simple level, Simon who's there, we spent 2 hours on this in a room yesterday, and actually industry, not just tech, but actually the biggest pain point is digital skills. And there are two problems in that. One, nobody really knows, even in the digital industry, is exactly what skills we'll need in 5 years. So we're trying to, how do you get better at the prediction, and how do you bring industry closer to education? Because at the minute they're miles apart in many ways, and everybody kind of acknowledges that. So I think everybody recognises it's a problem, but designing the solution is they partly not got some of the powers they want, but actually where they've got the powers, it's quite a complex thing. So I think the ambition's there, which is good. We've now got everybody to a point, I think, where there is recognition that digital and the creative economy are incredibly important to the economic future of the city, the city region, and that we've got a massive skills shortage. And when we talk about digital, we don't just mean coding. So that, so even just that, to get design into that conversation and say, actually, there's a really big component part of this that is design skills, and is not just about people who can code, or that they're incredibly important. So I think we've got the people at the table who want to make that better. It's now about bringing some other people to the table who can help just design a better way, to deliver education, because largely, teachers are removed from the real commercial world, and it's no fault of the teachers. They're under huge amounts of pressure themselves and trying to just kind of deliver the curriculum they've been told by government to deliver.
Because I think it's more around problem solving and team skills.
Yes,
it's
the softer skills.
Completely wrong, and you're beating education up. That's not a good place to start. Don't do that. That's not right.
I don't think we're beating at education, but I think it's what we can do to support.
Before I've heard that we are completely out of touch with industry. That surprises me greatly.
Well, I think it depends on which bit of education you're talking about. So I think at the
blanket statement, which is quite dangerous.
Well, I think the early career choices, where people, what we know is that 11, 12, people are beginning to work out, you know, what GCSEs they might want to take and then what career they might take. And the reality is, for a lot of people in Greater Manchester, the children that we might like to know, be aware of this industry, don't even know this industry exists. So it's on a base level. There's first of all just making people aware there's a thing called digital design service or whatever, transport or whatever it is, and that they might want to go into it. But then it's better designing the pathway, and I think, I mean, it's interesting. Certainly, nobody in the room yesterday was beating education. Everybody was saying actually they've got a really difficult job. How do we collaborate better? And how do we?
Parents as well.
Yeah, I mean, parents are a factor in that, obviously. But the reality is, a lot of kids just simply don't even know those. You know, in building the BBC next to kids in Salford, they don't automatically know what all the jobs. And you know, there's then an ecosystem job to go. These are all the things you can do here, and these are all the jobs, and this is the pathway into it. And none of that's a quick fix. So we've got an immediate pain point around digital skills and creative skills. But there's a 10-year problem to get kids who are now 11 into those career choices that isn't going to solve our immediate pain point, you know.
Well, it's part of the manifesto, we're sort of discussing those kind of, there's two things that have always got to kind of work in parallel. There's kind of that long-term goal and then the short-term, what we can actually do. I think it's brilliant that I've worked in education, and then I'm currently working in the BBC, and we're working on the government trailblazer for the UX apprenticeship, and it's just horrendous, like having to deal with that at the moment, because it's a real pain to get through. You know, you think this is a brilliant idea, you know, the government have designed apprenticeships and allowing employers to be part of those, but they're really slow. And I think the thing that I've kind of come to realise is, and I almost accept, is that education will take a long time. You know, it's almost quite regressive in ways, but not the education, it's more the policy makers around that, so in government. But education is so important, and the more that we as an industry can do things like going into schools, like there's recently been some research released the other day, and I'll have to forward it, but it's showing, it's quantifying the impact of what a talk does from an employer going into low performing schools, and how it's actually accelerated performance and achievement, and that's fantastic. And other things like in Manchester we've got POD. I don't know if anyone from Sharp Project is here who's involved with POD. Honestly, POD is almost like my mini version of what I would love to achieve long term with an apprenticeship at the BBC, for example. To have the ability to bring those young people in, sort of 16 to 18, we pay them, and they come in for kind of paid placements. And at the moment, I'm absolutely using that, because I know that even though I've got to keep that long-term thing going, so keep pushing for the policy and the change, but then using things like POD and Sharp Project that are things that you can have as quick fixes almost, that happen straight away, that you can actually access as a business, and it's absolutely wonderful. We've got things like that in Manchester, and we should take that model and almost try and make it even bigger, because it's great.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes. What else do we need to tackle? Where else can design help, do we think?
We've done education, we can do health, we can do transport.
So, other subjects that always come up in these conversations are homelessness, which we haven't touched on, digital well-being, healthy ageing. What are people's thoughts?
We've got a comment from the back there, Casper.
Oh yeah, I would to bring in, I suppose, the visual landscape that we just see every day, kind of in the advertising spaces. It's kind of what we're here today is all structural, which is brilliant because it's longer term. I suppose, like you're saying, sooner potentially you could deal with advertising. But I think a lot of it kind of plays on people's kind of vulnerabilities. There's a lot of
ill well-being because of it. But maybe the design industry can kind of raise the bar on whether you can attach virtues to products and you sell it, or just have another approach to it rather than using the negative methods that have been used. So in Manchester, you've already, you've got a corpus coming in from everywhere and anywhere anyway, so that's going to be tricky in itself. But I'd love to see a certain amount of advertising space dedicated just for positivity, per se, or if you make them policymakers, have to sell in a particular way, but it's that finishing people that I've been looking at as well. Mostly structural data.
Okay, interesting. And that probably then triggers a conversation about responsible design at some point as well.
That's responsible design. I mean, you could take some advertising space around the city like Liverpool did and talk about the 5 ways to well-being, or how your product or service or whatever deals with that. But you'd have to understand the 5 ways to well-being, you'd have to translate that, and it'd have to be part of the manifesto of the city's ambitions to get everybody walking, communicating, etc. But yeah,
I think widening that discussion out a bit into the sort of notion of inclusivity and a city which can incorporate everybody. There's a messaging side to that, but there's also a kind of policy and delivery side to that, and the two need to actually connect.
Yeah, and I would say that the one area that people have been talking about is design for policy. There's an enormous amount of use of design for policy making in London, in the Cabinet Office, the Policy Lab. There's also the Scottish Government are using designers a lot to help them with their their health service delivery, their social care delivery. There's a lot of design consultancy in Scotland now getting a lot of work just helping develop new policies and new pathways for services. And we need to also up those skills and promote that to the local authority, not just the Manchester City Council, but all the city councils in the northwest.
Okay, any last points from the floor before we do 2 minutes wrap up and say thanks for coming along? Anyone?
I think just
sorry, Chandler.
You just about to say, just to kind of close it off, I think one thing that we were saying here about enabling spaces for, I guess, things like this, for instance, a really good point you made about the space being the Cube beforehand, having come here many times to see some great exhibitions in the past, whether you're into 100 different chairs or not, there has been something for everyone in this space. And I think it does start, for the question about enabling spaces. I do speak to a lot of property developers now that don't want Costa coffees, they don't want Starbucks, they are looking for independence, they are looking for Pollen bakeries, and they are looking for the next Fred Aldis sort of space. Obviously, to do that and enable that, they can't have Costa coffee rents. They have to reduce that. So there has to be a trade-off. And how that works. If you want to big up your scheme and be part of the creative community, then you have to give a little bit back. And the developers that we work with, there seems to be a bit of a turning point with that, because they know that they don't want, again, your Starbucks and your H&Ms in there. A big thing that we don't have within the city that maybe we had a little bit with here is we don't have a base for design. We don't have a central talking space. Obviously, factories is coming online, which could change a lot for the city, which is going to be really important. But we do need a space where people can come and congregate. The Modernist Society have just got their great little space in the Northern Quarter, who've just done everything off their own back. But they've created a space for themselves where they can fund their own events and enable that. And I think maybe that we need to look at, is there a space for design within the city to celebrate previous design, but also how we can facilitate things like this, workshops and that much going forward as well.
That's a good point. There's one last point before we close. Just
the question really, because you talked about the private sector and the public sector. I just wondered why you talked about the voluntary sector and non-technical.
Sorry, that's just a terminology error. Yeah, I kind of I suppose what I mean is this is not a public sector in isolation activity. It's the public sector reaching out to work with other sectors, but you're quite right, third sector too. Martin, one last point. 2 last points, sorry.
I've just been listening to a community largely designers come up with great ideas, and that's pretty easy for us to do. We train to do that. So that's the what. And I'm really interested now in how we translate that into the how, because we could come again together in another year and come up with great ideas again.
Yeah.
So I think there's lots of great ideas we've come up with. I think we need to drill down into a small number to be able to show how we can do this as a community, how we can gain credibility as a community to be able to help policymakers. So we've asked a lot of policymakers today. I'm not sure how many there are. So how can we help them do that? And how can we as a creative community not just come here and have a great conversation, have some chat and meet up with people, but translate that into something more tangible. So it's about that, the next step, rather than us just having a great conversation. Now I would take all of these ideas and want to do them. How do we do that?
I would say that designers tend to congregate with each other, and I think designers need to actually go out and go to NA economy conferences, transport conferences, health conferences, and actually be evangelists for design to actually do something rather than just always congregate around each other.
Sorry, one last point and then we will wrap up because people need to go at 5 o'clock.
My point is that we will also consult for the community what is their issue actually, and then create separate teams who can address it and work on top of what actually people are missing, because we can see what we are missing when we go through the city, but we go only through certain amounts of parts of the city. We don't go to Bolton because we don't live there, and we don't know what is the issue there with their space. And there is not so many people that can pick up and campaigns meetings, because it's not just this part of the community that are proactive.
Definitely.
And then we can involve them and try to, like, there is this B-lines and the cycling lanes, and there's communities that are formed and they are doing really things to implement the changes themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are going to finish there. We could go on. Casper, I'm just going to hand to you for the last 60 seconds.
Okay, I'll just quickly summarise a couple of points. The first thing is, we had all our design stories. My design story is Manchester Central Library. It's permeable, it's open to all, it's owned by its users, they have a real sense of ownership of the space, and it's respectful of its heritage. It's a great place in the way it's been developed. And in the doing of it, it trained a whole load of apprentices. So it's a really good example. There are plenty of others like that in Manchester. And so we still want to collect people's design stories, because that's much of what we can do. I think, actually, in terms of ideas gathered, we had about 7 that came up once we started talking about the challenges. Many of them were kind of focused on physicality of space, which in a way is quite understandable. But I think, obviously, one of the big ones that always comes up in all of our debates, and Zoe, I think you mentioned it actually, raised it in several of our debates before, which is about creative spaces or spaces for artists in the city centre. I think, it's a hot issue about maintaining affordable space for disruptive, challenging, new thinking inside actually city centres and not push it out to the outside. But it is a difficult thing to do, because the city council, no more than anybody else, can just ignore the context in which it operates and what the costs are of the ground rent and all the rest of it. They still have to work with that reality. So they have to figure out ways in which it can be done in a sustainable way in the long term. This is why this Danish idea was quite interesting. It is looking at the long-term value for the city of having that type of element in there, and we should continue exploring these things. Everybody loves to talk about it, so I'm sure we'll continue to explore that, and certainly the manifesto maybe can make a contribution to that. The other one that was mentioned was integrated transport. Integrated transport is a thing that not only connects people and spaces, but is connected with almost all of the other things that we're talking about. It is absolutely central, and I do think it's an area in which I'm sure we'll be looking. The other one, which is also often raised, is that of green spaces in the city centre. I thought it was interesting, the ideas of vertical gardens, but also the idea of creating a park in the city centre, finding new ways of approaching that. It'd be great if we could find some solutions to that. The health and unemployment issues in Gorton, East Manchester, obviously aren't big things. While we know that health innovation and combination of health and care as a result of the evolution package is such a big both challenge and big opportunity, it's certainly something that I think we should be engaged with. And then, of course, there's the one about skills, education, and pathways, which we were talking about. We had our whole design debate about that subject, of course. It is absolutely critically important, and we want an industry which, for all the kids that are living in Greater Manchester, from whatever background they are, they can look at it and they can feel that there are opportunities for them in that. That's actually a challenge to us as an industry in terms of the pictures that we put out there. So yes, I think the advertising and marketing one, I'm not quite sure exactly how we could engage with it, but it is definitely an issue. To me, it's also actually linked to the general media and digital wellness agenda as well, in terms of the things that we are bombarded with and consume. But then I think we ended up talking about the central government of Scotland using design for many different things. Civic service design, creating opportunities for designers. Of course, this is exactly what the manifesto is about in many ways. But it's actually not just having a lab inside the city council, but it's having a partnership with the design community and looking for a new, broader, more open way in which we can procure the best talent. So these are the things that we want to do. A meeting like this is only a starting point. It's only a point in the conversation. I so agree with your point that we need to have broader conversation. It's not about designers talking to each other. And actually, if you want to design something decent, it's actually understanding what people's needs are out there. It's not understanding what we like to do as designers. I think it goes back to Susie's first point, which is that a lot of the good design is based on research. You need to understand what the needs actually are. So we know that there are plenty of opportunities. What we're hoping with the manifesto is that we have a different context for ourselves or to address those and find maybe new ways of doing it. This is just a starting point. We hope to have more conversations. Maybe we'll develop channels and pathways for people to be involved in that. But we'll all be in touch with you and ask you to keep in touch with us. And if ideas about great design stories and challenges occur to you that didn't occur to you actually during the session, then we remain open to receiving them. I'll look forward to that. So thank you very, very much all for turning up. So the idea now is that we'll